You found me again, did you? Well, hello, my name is Wes Jones, and this is my channel on fantasy mapping. Specifically, it's a channel about how to draw fantasy maps. In this episode, we're looking at how to draw mountains. Mountains are the backbone of fantasy maps. They set the tone and the vibe, and learning how to draw mountains is essential, especially if you want to get your fantasy map drawing skills to the next level. What we're going to do here is we're going to look at how to draw a mountain in one of the more common ways from that side view. I'm going to break it down into 2 steps. Step number 1. You need to decide what that mountain looks like from that side profile. Let's draw that. Let's draw a very simple looking mountain. Maybe just a little bit of interest in the mountain. And that's it. Step number 1. You decided what the mountain looks like. Pretty simple, right? Well, what's step number 2? Step number 2 is deciding where the shadows and the highlights are on the mountain. You need to decide whether the sun comes from this direction or this direction. In this case, we're going to make the sun come from the left, and we're going to have the shadows on the right. You can change this, of course. It doesn't really matter as long as you're consistent within that map. Once you have established that, then you need to draw those details. And you're going to do that by changing your pen, maybe make it half as big, and you're going to draw lines coming down the mountain. Break them up a little bit. You can see that you're starting to establish that the right-hand side of this mountain is more shadowed than the left-hand side. Occasionally, I'll draw a little bit of information on the other side of the mountain just to balance it out. But there you have it. You've got a mountain done. That's all you really need to do. Step 1 and 2. Of course, mountains come in ranges. So let's go draw in those ranges. First thing I want to do, let's start on a new layer. And we'll put the pen to larger, thicker size. Let's draw 5 or 6 mountains. Now when you're drawing ranges, you have to think about consistency. You want to be consistent in the size of your mountains. If they vary too much, they don't really look right. You want them to look like they belong together. And you want consistency of shape. You want to have some variation, but not too much that, again, it doesn't look like it fits in. Let's draw one more mountain. You can see that these mountains have a somewhat similar feel to them. That's the outline. One of the things I like doing, especially if I'm going to start drawing a lot, is I like naming the layers. So let's just call this one out for outline, and we'll make another layer above it. And let's just call this DET for detail. And make the smaller pen. Now what you noticed is I drew all the outlines first. I like doing that, again, for consistency. And then I like drawing all the shadow lines. Let's draw some of those shadow lines. So again, consistency is important. You can see that I've established the lines are going to look something like this. Often what I'll do is I'll say, okay, let's say I want between 5 and 3 lines of shadows. And so you can see here I've got 4. Well, I try and do that with all the mountains just so they look right. Don't make them exactly the same. This mountain's a little bigger and it's behind this one, so you can give it some detail over there. I'll add a little bit different lines over there just to give a little bit of variation in this mountain. But again, you can see I've got about 4 lines. I'll make this one 5. Add some over here. You can see create the shadow lines, and there's a consistency between them. They look like they all belong, but there's enough variation in them that they look unique. You know what? How about this? As a bonus, let's color this mountain range. I'm going to show you how I would go about coloring this. One of the many ways that one can do this, but this is probably the most common way I would do it. Let's add another layer. I'm going to call this one B for base. You don't need to write it out as long as I know what it is. And we're going to change the color. Let's make it grayish in this orangey realm, and the pen size is bigger. And let's use this transparent watercolor. Is this big enough? I always like testing it first. Now let's make it a little bigger. Okay, and start coloring in. What you're doing here is you're creating the base color. You don't have to be overly detailed with this. You can leave some holes here and there sometimes. It depends what scale you're drawing this map. Very often these mountains are very small, so it's okay if you miss a little bit. And for the sake of this video, I'm going to draw it fairly quickly. But first thing I do is to draw that base. Okay, what would I do next? I like working from dark to light. So I'm going to call this D for dark. And I'm going to set this to multiply. Multiply basically takes the color you're drawing and multiplies it to the one below. I'll have to make it just a little bit darker. And then let's add some of this in here. You can see that I'm starting to give this mountain a little bit of dimension. It's okay if I went outside the boundary there. Let's make this dark over here, again over here, and because there's a little overlap here, let's add a little bit of darkness there. Looking not too bad. Very often I'll do 2 levels of this. I'll make the pen a little bit smaller because it's being a little bit more specific. Let's go to about 150 and, oh, didn't go to multiply. Go to multiply. You can see that I've got that line in there. And look at that. That looks like that needs more shadows in that section. Maybe a little bit over there. You can see I've established a pretty good dark side of the mountain. Next, you can add in some highlights. So I'll add in an H there, name that layer. I vary it sometimes between screen and overlay, but in this case we'll use an overlay function. Let's make this pretty light and let's color this side of the mountain. You can see that it adds a little highlight. I don't do too much of this. I find that shadows are more important than the highlights, but the highlight does do a nice thing. It makes the mountain look much more three-dimensional. Add one more layer. Again, we're going to make this highlight. We'll make this, again, add another layer, make this overlay, and we'll make this the snow caps. Really color it in. And you can see that in just a couple minutes, I've colored in the mountain. So there you go. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you've learned something about drawing mountains. Just a couple of things. I do have a website, fantasymapping.com, if you want to find out some more information, and I actually have a book that teaches you how to draw fantasy maps called Fantasy Mapping Drawing Worlds. The link's in the description. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did. Thank you.